Welcome everyone. What we're going to do is we're going to work on a new video series where we're going to talk about object-oriented programming in Java. And we're going to do it through the the context of how you might start doing a role-playing game, RPG. Mainly because in that case we have lots of interesting objects, so it's the perfect way to talk about object-oriented programming. We're going to use Android Studio for this, primarily because I like the way Java is set up, especially for object-oriented and creating your own original objects. What this is not going to be is a complete game. So if that's what you're looking for, this is not the video series for you. If you want to learn about object-oriented programming, great. This is what we're going to do. We're going to do it in an Android Studio project. It's really not about the project itself so much. But we're just going to go ahead. I've created sort of a hierarchy, and this comes from a variety of sources. What we're going to do is we're going to create sort of a base class called an entity. And an entity is just anything that has a name and a description. So we're going to use that to sort of any kind of object. We're going to eventually take that entity and make a container, an entity container. It'll be a special kind of entity that can hold multiple entities inside of it. Things like inventory or whatever you might have, treasure chest or something, anything that can contain other entities. We're also, a type of entity we're going to create is an agent or something that you can use to play. And of course, the definition is right here, a personal thing that can take an active role or produce a specific effect. So that would include things like players, non-playing characters, creatures. Another type of entity would be kind of item. Things like weapons, armor, tools, food, currency. And of course, another object is going to be the game itself. Really, that's going to be the main activity. But we may create a separate class for that. And if there's time, we might even talk about a class that allows different characters to battle each other out. I'm not promising this will be in there, but this is something I'd like to work towards. And so this is going to be the general overview of what we're going to do. So what I want to do now is create an Android Studio project, an entity, give it a name, give it a description, and see if we can create it and display some information about it. So I go back to my Android project, and I have this rendering problem. It does say try to build the project. Sometimes it writes itself. I want to look at the text view. So this is what the code looks like for the content main. Yeah, we do have some of these issues here. One of the things that I'm going to do is, even though it gives me these rendering problems, I'm going to see if I can just load it in the emulator and see if that works. That may write itself. And of course, this video is not going to be about dealing with those kinds of problems, so hopefully you won't have the problem. If we can get it to display on the render, then I'm okay. We don't have to worry about the rendering problems. If we can see it on the emulator is what I meant to say. All right, so we're going to go ahead and load that up. And while we're loading it up, we're going to do a couple things in here in our content main. One of the things I want to do is put all of our information inside of a linear layout. I'm going to put the linear layout inside of our relative layout. Okay. Let's go ahead and launch to see if it's able to see the text. All right, I can see my text here. It's working. So the welcome is going to stay here. This is going to get changed in just a bit. But as you can see, there's sort of the linear layout, the way I've coded it on the left. You might want to pause the video at this point. Okay, those UI elements are in place. The main one we want to deal with is this, the main screen text. So we need to go to our Java class and MainActivity and set it up so we can change the text that currently says yo. We want to fix that. We want it to display some information about the character, about the entity, because we're going to create an entity next after that. So we double click, go to MainActivity, and we're going to focus on at the top. We call this at the top of the class. We're going to declare our UI elements, which in this case is just going to be one, and that's the text view. And then we're going to call this main screen text. Okay, we declare it there. And then when we create the app, when we run it the first time, this is where we're going to do some work. I might get rid of this stuff here. For now, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go after the set content view. We're now going to connect UI elements from the view. Okay. So in order to do that, we're going to do text view. Oh, wait. Sorry, we already did that part. Main screen text equals, and I think this is how we do it, text view, find view by our ID, r.id dot main screen text, like so. And then what we're going to do is let's add a couple pieces here. I'm going to display some information. We're going to create a string. We're going to call it output equals, and then howdy folks, something like that. I just want to make sure that we're able to do this. And then we are going to have the main screen text. We're going to set the text to be the output, like so. And we're going to test this out. If it says howdy folks, so when we start, we will know it works. All right, there it is. It now says howdy folks. So we know now that we can programmatically change this text. So we're ready now to create an entity and do some object-oriented work. And then so we'll talk about different concepts related to it. We're ready to move on and to create our first class, which is called entity. And I've given a class diagram here. Remember what I said, I defined an entity as something that has a name and a description. Now you may see class diagrams in charts where it looks like a box with a couple of windows. And so in this case, the class diagram, the name of the class is entity. And a class is a blueprint. It's the blueprint for all entities in our game. The entity title starts with a capital letter. That is common among object-oriented programming, that your objects always begin with a capital letter. Your classes, I mean, begin with a capital letter. We're just going to give it 2 instance variables. And they're instance variables because each individual entity will have its own unique name and unique description. Each instance of the entity class, shall we say. There will be a constructor method. And that constructor method will allow us to create entities. And then we're going to have a getter method and a setter method for the name, and a getter method and a setter method for description, which will allow us to access these variable values. Okay, so that's what we're going to create. In order to do that, we need to go over and we're going to create a new class in the Java folder. Find the com.whatever where your main activity is. Right-click on the top and choose New Java Class. The name is Entity, capital E. Entity, not entity. Okay, that's how we spell it. Here's our class. Let's zoom in on it. In fact, I'm going to move this over. And we really need to just focus on entity at this point. Okay, our entity is going to have some instance variables. They are going to be private. They are both strings. String name and string description. Okay, that's our definition of an entity. It has a name and a description. However, these need to be private. In good object-oriented design, your instance variables should be private, and then you choose whether the rest of the code has read access or write access using some methods. Before we do it, we're going to create our constructor. Now, in object-oriented programming, we have to have a way of creating new objects. And we have a special method for that called a constructor. And the way you do it is you should make it public because other classes, other objects, or other code should be able to create objects. So we make it public, and then we just title it after the class entity, like so. Okay, a constructor is going to look like this. And so there's different ways to do constructors. In one case, we can do a default constructor, a default constructor, which is going to set the name and description to a default value. In this case, just an empty string like so. Name equals basically empty string. Description equals the same, empty string. So that's a default constructor. We're going to do plural constructor method because we may choose to create our entity by giving it a name and a description from the very beginning. So in this case, we're going to do what's called a constructor or a method overload. And an overload means it has the same name, but it has different parameters. So we're going to give it a name, and we're going to give it a description. So this is a method constructor overload. And now what we can do is when we create our entity, we can give it a name and a description. So now we're going to put name equals name. And you might be going, well, that's kind of odd. And description equals description. Well, the name that's on the left is referring to this private string of name. And the description on the left is referring to this description. But this name is referring to the entity name, and this is referring to the entity description. So we could do this, entity name like so, entity description like so, but then we have to change it here. You see how that works? It's up to you how you want to do it. You can do it the way I did it originally or after. The nice thing about this is it's a little bit easier to tell which variable is which. Most people coding object-oriented that are comfortable with it will have no problem knowing what's going on there. But now you can kind of see this entity name is the outside variable or the outside value coming in to set the name. Let's go ahead and see if we can basically invoke these methods by creating an entity object in our main class. So watch what we do here. I am going to now create an entity object. Actually, let's change this up here. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. It's not letting me because I'm holding shift down, not control. All right. Create an entity object. So we'll put entity thing equals new entity. And now, look what I did. When I put the little parentheses here, we see one thing that says no parameters or string entity name. We'll call this thing1. And now we need to give it a description.
Thing 2.
No, that's not. That's a different entity. Something. How about a fun-loving thing with wild hair, like so. Okay, so that's how we construct an object. And let me just expand a little bit over here. Sorry, it's kind of hard to see both of these at once. We're able to create an entity thing. Unfortunately, we're able to give it a name and a description, but we cannot get the name. Look, if I do thing.name, it gives me an error. It doesn't exist. So what we need to do now is find a way to access the name and access its description. For that, we need what's called an accessor method. So let's do that right now. We already have the instance variable called name. We just need to find a way to get the name and display it. Same thing goes for description. So we're going to make this public. It's going to be a string because it's going to return the string. Call it, look at that. Right here, it already tells me maybe I want to call it get name. And it knows that because it knows it has a private variable called name. So that's pretty slick that Android Studio does that for us. And then all we have to do here is return the name. So this accessor method, also known as a getter method, allows us to get the name. So we have this public string get name, and inside we return the name. Now watch what I can do here. Thing dot get name. So that's going to actually return a string. So guess what I can do? String output. We have our first entity plus thing dot get name. Okay. So pause the video here if you want to see the code. See if it works. Okay, there it is. We have our first entity, thing1. Okay, so in this tutorial, we kind of got us started, and a little bit longer because we try to do a lot. Create our Android Studio project, create our first class. In my next video, we're going to round out entity, but I'm going to also talk in general about object-oriented programming to give you some terms. Make sure you understand just kind of like what you're doing as you are coding it. So stay tuned for that video.